All right, good morning. I'm Ariel Rivers, NACD's Pacific Region Representative, and I will facilitate this 1-hour NACD Urban and Community Conservation webinar. Thank you for joining us to learn about urban and, strategies for marketing your conservation district. We will record this webinar and post on NACD's website along with a PDF for the presentations for future access. Please share widely with your networks and anyone who may be interested in seeing this or previous presentations. Please keep yourself muted for the duration of today's webinar. After the presentations, we will have a question and answer session. Please type your questions in the chat box and I will read them out loud for the recording. We'll address as many as we can in the time that we have. Now I see Alex has joined us, Alex Schmidt, who will provide a few introductory comments. Alex is chair of NACD's Urban and Community Resource Policy Group, which is part of our Natural Resources Policy Committee. Alex?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the monthly Urban and Community Conservation webinar offered by the National Association of Conservation Districts through the generous support of our sole sponsor, the Scotts Miracle-Gro Company. These sessions are designed by NACD's Urban and Community Resource Policy Group, a subcommittee of district officials and partners charged with guiding the association's service and support for districts working in developed and developing areas. Our goal through these webinars is to help districts share what they are doing in their community nationwide and enable them to learn from each other and from other various partner agencies and organizations. We appreciate the support of Scotts Miracle-Gro Foundation for making them possible. If you have a chance, please give us some feedback on the webinar and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover in the future by contacting our staffer, Ariel Rivers. And as always, please let NACD leadership know what type of assistance you would like from the National Association for your urban and community conservation work. Thanks for attending today. And now back to you, Ariel.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. So before we begin, I'd like to make a few announcements. We are seeking evaluations of the webinar series to make sure that we are offering topics that are of interest to all of you. This is especially important as well to show the impact of the webinars to our funders, Scotts Miracle-Gro. So please submit an evaluation, which I will link in the chat box. We're also still seeking presentations for our fiscal year 2022 webinar presentations. If you have a project you would like to share, please consider presenting during the webinars. I'll also link that form in the chat box for you to submit any webinar ideas. And finally, to be inclusive of all NACD members in their respective time zones, starting with the next webinar in October, we will move the webinars to 4 p.m. Eastern on the third Thursday of each month. Please stay tuned to the announcements as well as NACD's weekly newsletter for additional upcoming opportunities to join these webinars. And of course, as Alex mentioned, you may contact me with any questions about any of these announcements as well at ariel-rivers@nacdnet.org. And now I will introduce our speaker for today, Laura Meyer of the Washington State Conservation Commission. Laura is the communication manager for WSCC, where she's worked since 2013. She has a master's degree in environmental communication and a bachelor's in film and video. Her previous experience includes providing design and strategic communication services as a consultant, writing for a regional newspaper, and working with Michigan Sea Grant to promote fisheries heritage and resource conservation. Thank you for your presentation today, Laura. And with that, I'll hand it over to you to share your screen and start your presentation.
Thanks, Ariel, and thanks, Alex, and the Urban and Community Group for organizing this, and NACD, Scotts Miracle-Gro. I'm happy to be here, and I really appreciate folks for joining us today. I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you're going to walk away with some tips and really actionable resources that will help you reach communities that you haven't reached before, or strengthen relationships with people and communities that you're seeking to build better relationships with. And I'm going to do that in a couple ways, or through a couple lenses. One is around connection and the other is around capacity. And I think the capacity part is probably self-explanatory. I don't know any conservation district that's just rolling in capacity to do communications and marketing work. A lot of times that's something you have to build up to. Often I hear that can be one of the first things that falls off when workloads are pretty heavy. So the second part of today's presentation is going to focus on some tools and resources that we've created in Washington State, but are really broadly applicable to conservation districts across the nation to make it easier to market your conservation district and tell your story. But the first part is going to focus on connection and how you create an outreach plan that's really based on establishing connection. And so if you're wondering why that is, I want to share a little story about what happened to me a couple weeks ago. And this is as close of a picture as I can get to what I looked like a couple weeks ago. It was just one of those days that I'm sure many of you have probably pretty often, where there's just too much coming at once. And it was just Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. And between Zoom meetings, when I thought I might get a little break, it would be a phone call or an email that I had to respond to right away. And I was just being pulled in all these different directions. Had a little window where I thought I was going to get another break, and the phone rang again. And as much as I love my job and I love speaking to conservation district folks, I just was not fully present because I was just thinking about when my next meeting is coming up. Am I ready to go for that? Do I have all the files open? Did I write down everything from the last meeting that I said I was going to do? I was trying to listen, but my brain just was not present. I was still thinking about all the other things I had going on in my life. So I was doing the best I could, but I knew it wasn't as well as I wanted to be doing for this person I was talking to. And then all of a sudden they said something that caused everything in my brain to stop, and I gave them my full attention. And what they said was, "So where are you from in Michigan?" And it made me stop for a couple of reasons, because first, this person clearly had taken the time to either talk to somebody I know to find out that that's where I'm from. I work for the Washington State Conservation Commission. How would they know it's from Michigan? Or they read my biography on our website. And that meant a lot, that somebody was interested in who I was. Somehow there was a connection forming there. And so I told them where I was from, and it turned out they had vacationed somewhere similar, like in that vicinity, which was really strange. A lot of people don't go up to Northeast Michigan, which is partly why I loved living there. But they had a connection to Michigan. We talked about that, and all of a sudden they had my full attention. And I was able, when we returned to talking about business again, I was way more focused on being able to provide them the answers they were looking for and that full attention I wanted to give them in the first place. And so that's really why I want to start this first part of today's session by focusing on connection, because it really is the foundation for effective communication and outreach. And you can have all these tips and resources to help you actually do communication and outreach, but unless you have a really good plan in place for establishing connection with the audiences and communities that you want to reach, it may fall flat. They may be distracted. They may not see what the link and connection is for them in your work. So I'm going to take a few minutes right now to share with you an approach that I've used and found really helpful and effective, and actually not overwhelming. A lot of times we see outreach plans that require a lot of work and a lot of time and can be overwhelming, and then result in this really lengthy document that ends up sitting on a shelf, unfortunately. And while having that really in-depth, comprehensive approach can be incredibly helpful if you have that kind of capacity, it just isn't typically realistic for a lot of us in a lot of conservation districts. So this is a 4-step approach. It ends up being a worksheet that I'll share with you in a little bit, and Ariel will share in the chat with all of you. It's just a 4-step worksheet, and you could take a half hour to an hour and be better off than nothing. So I'm going to go through what I call the 4 cornerstones of establishing connection with your audience, and then show you how that feeds into this worksheet for your outreach plan. So here are the 4 cornerstones here. We're going to go through one at a time and talk about what steps you would take under each one of these phases. And the first is to pause for purpose. And what I mean by that is really looking at first, how does the outreach that you're wanting to do with this audience, with this person, with this community, how does it relate to the goals of your conservation district? You don't want to just be doing outreach for outreach sake. It's really be about the goals you're wanting to accomplish. There's some bigger picture. How does it fit into your strategic plan that your conservation district has set forward? And really thinking about, I think once you have that goal and a better idea of what you're building towards and wanting to accomplish, it kind of helps you from going just around in circles and not really knowing what to do with the relationship to actually knowing where to guide it as you move forward. And the second part of pause for purpose is to think about a call to action, and it's different than your goal. So when you are, there may be a larger goal that you're ultimately working towards, but you're going to have a lot of step-by-step interactions with your audience leading up to that larger goal a lot of times. And so for each interaction, is there a specific call to action or a specific behavior that you're wanting to get out of that relationship or that interaction at that time? So for example, maybe you are interested, there's an organization or a business that you'd like to eventually work up to your goal of having them become a sponsor of an event at your conservation district. But rather than going from zero to asking them to contribute as a sponsor, you want to build up a relationship so then you feel more comfortable and they feel more confident investing as a sponsor. So as a first interaction, your the call to action might be you just want to have them agree to have a second meeting with you or say yes to attending one of your events so they can see what they're like. So when you're having those interactions, being mindful ahead of time of what's your call to action for that meeting or that interaction you're going to have with your audience. So that's pause for purpose. The second cornerstone of connection is imagining your audience. And very intentional with the wording there. It's not just identifying your audience, it's imagining your audience, because you really need to know who they are. And that starts with research, really looking into what really makes them tick. And one thing, an example I've used for this is when we're having meetings with legislators or members of Congress, there's so much you can find in their biographies about what organizations they belong to, where they used to work, where they volunteered. And that goes for almost any audience you're working with. If it's a person or an elected official, looking at where they've volunteered can tell you so much about what they care about. And I can imagine a lot of supervisors or commissioners out there in the audience today can relate to this, where you're volunteering your time to serve on your conservation district board. And you don't do that just, it's not that you're getting paid to do it, it's because you care so much about it that you are giving your time and your talents to that position because of how much you care about it. So finding out where if it's a singular audience, where they've volunteered in the past can be a great indication of what they really care about. So just try and get a better sense of who they are through that research, talking to people who know this audience, actually starting to have conversations with members of a community to learn a little bit more about what they care about, and also finding out who they trust, who could be a potential spokesperson or testimonial that you could gather that they would really listen to because it's someone that they trust or someone from an organization that they've belonged to and trust. Those personal connections can really be a great sort of like review of you in a sense. And thinking ahead of time about speaking their same language. So if it's somebody that is not familiar with conservation and agriculture and natural resource work, we don't want to go in talking about BMPs and 303D lists and RCPP. I mean, they're lost. And so just knowing ahead of time, is that appropriate for some audiences? It might be. You can just jump right in with that jargon because they speak it too. But just knowing ahead of time where to start with your language, and so that they don't feel excluded by the words we're using when we start these relationships. In general, I usually do try to stay away from acronyms and jargon. It's hard to do that because it's become such a part of my vocabulary at this point. But it's just a good thing to think about ahead of time. If there's any technical terms or issues you're going to be talking about, how might you phrase it differently for an audience that's not familiar with that? And the fourth part of this phase is identifying and really thinking about how to use their channels of communication. It might be that you have a lot of fun putting together videos for your conservation district, and that's great. But if your audience doesn't engage with videos that way, if they're still really into face-to-face meetings, then you need to do face-to-face meetings. We don't want to, on top of asking an audience to do some other action we've identified, also ask them to take on a different form of communication or channel of communication that they just aren't used to using. So knowing how they prefer to communicate ahead of time and tailoring your message and the delivery of that to their channels. That brings us to the third cornerstone of connection, which is focus and filter. And that really is about setting your reasons aside for why you might, or why you and your conservation district may want your audience to take a certain action or help you achieve a certain goal, and making it about them too. So this is where you're going to refer to your research to help you filter out. You'll have lots of personal, scientific, financial reasons why you think it's important for your for your audience to take whatever action you've identified. So you have to filter all that out by looking at your research that you've done on your audience to really identifying why is it that they are going to care about what you're asking them to do. And a lot of times with the work that we do and how much conservation has multi-benefits, it's pretty easy to frame whatever action you're wanting your audience to take to something they're interested in. Because conservation, the focus of your work may have something to do with fish habitat or water quality, but chances are there's way more other co-benefits of what you are wanting to accomplish that will relate to their specific interests. Maybe it's erosion, maybe it's soil health, but whatever it is, with conservation, it does make it a lot easier to frame the action that you're desiring for your audience. And the second part of this is identifying the potential barriers your audience may have to taking that action you're asking them to take. Are they limited for time? Do they not have much financial or human resource capacity? What are the barriers based on the action that you're asking them to take or would like them to take that they could face? And really trying to figure out ways to turn it from a barrier to a hurdle that they can actually get over. So, if they don't have time to attend your event and provide opening remarks, giving them the option to do a video recording so that they still feel valued and know that you care about their voice being heard and they have this opportunity to address your community. But just being willing to be flexible and think about ways to help folks to overcome their barriers and turn them into hurdles they can get over to the action you're wanting to achieve. And that takes us to the fourth cornerstone, which is less is memorable. And this can be the hardest, it is for me at least, the hardest to do, because it's really about simplifying everything that you say, the way you present it, to as short and concise and to the point as possible, which with conservation can be really hard because there's so much that conservation districts do. And even with a singular practice, there's so many benefits to it. But really, again, looking at your research, what your audience cares about, and identifying a max of like 3 key points per audience of what you really need them to know, and delivering that with simple language, very simple, easy to read data, and even simple photos. And so as an example of that, I want to show you selection of photos. So these are all from planting events from conservation districts in Washington state. And I think the tendency is that we think, maybe more is more. So you put tons of photos out there, but it actually feels a lot more overwhelming to look at this screen than it does to look at this one. And you actually have a chance with just one photo to get more of a connection with the people in it, to really get a sense of what they were feeling at this planting event. It just makes you happy. Whereas just being overwhelmed by more sometimes can distract from what you're really trying to communicate. So with those 4 phases in mind, we're going to turn this into these cornerstones of connection into actual outreach work plan. And this is what we can share in the chat box for you, so you have a copy of it. You're welcome to use. And it's really a worksheet that is just based on those 4 cornerstones. So the first page, it's only 2 pages. You'll see the phase of pause for purpose. This is where you'll identify that overall goal that this outreach could be contributing to. There may be more than one. The specific audience you're working with, and the targeted action or behavior. And that's the one that could change depending on your interaction. It might be different every time you meet with this audience, what targeted action you're looking for. So once you have those things identified, you move into imagine your audience. And this is where you'll put your notes from the research you do on your audience. You'll make notes on what they're interested in, what their values are, what experiences they have, looking at their biography, learning from people who know them, where you might have some introductory talking points like, where are you from in Michigan? Figuring out who they trust. Are there folks that you work with that they already have a relationship with that could be a spokesperson or make the introduction to your conservation district for you? Identifying channels of information they use, look and see, like, are they active on social media? If so, what platforms? If not, do they write op-eds? Do they have a blog? Just try and figure out some ways that you might be able to interact with them, or even invite them to showcase your district on their platforms. And then just a quick note about whether you should be prepared with technical or non-technical language for that audience. On the second page, move into focus and filter. And there's a field here for you to identify what ways the targeted action or behavior you're seeking relates to your audience's interests. Looking at the real or perceived barriers that may prevent them from taking that targeted action or behavior. And then coming up with some solutions to help them overcome those, turn them into hurdles that would help them still take the action or behavior that you're seeking in a way that works for them. And then finally, less is memorable, just prompting you to really limit the points that you have for this audience to no more than 3. So you'd have 3 key points that you'd write out here based on what all the work you've done up in the first 3 phases. Seeing if there's a supporting fact or data or example that you could provide for them, or a testimonial based on the people that you've identified that they trust for each one of your points. And then 1 potential supporting visual. And you don't have to have those pieces for each of your points, but it's just something to think about in case it would make your point more effective. And so really, again, it's not, if you would have the capacity to do a really comprehensive outreach plan for each of your audiences, that's fantastic and you should do it. But this is just another way that rather than going in with no strategy or preparation ahead, it's a really simple way to come up with a good strategy and strengthen. Another really helpful part of this worksheet is that it's great for sustainability and succession planning. So if somebody at your staff member has established a relationship, if they've been tracking some of this information about the audience that they have a relationship with in these sheets, the next person that comes on board can refer to them and they don't have to start from zero. They actually can learn about the audience and carry that relationship forward. So those are the 4 cornerstones of connection and the outreach work plan I have to share with you to help you establish that connection, form that foundation, so that you have that connection piece. Comes the now what? You've got a plan, but you don't want to just sit there. You want to actually make it actionable, put it into place, and start taking action. And that's where now we're going to shift into talking about some tips and resources to help you build the capacity to do that. That's what I'm sharing on the screen right now is a link and a screenshot from a marketing toolkit that we've developed in Washington State. That link's right there at the top. And I have had the pleasure of working with a group, we call ourselves a communication partnership and outreach group of conservation district staff and board members. We've been working together for, oh gosh, several years, I think about 10 years, with the purpose to make it easier for conservation districts to market themselves and tell their story. We didn't want districts to have to be recreating the wheel. So if somebody already had a great example or a template for how to do something related to communications, we wanted to put it in a library or a toolkit that districts could access and build from and use. So they, again, we don't want everybody starting from zero. If we already have some great examples, we wanted a place to share them, easy to navigate. We also wanted to be more effective about speaking in one voice about conservation and presenting ourselves as a united front for voluntary conservation. So when we thought about it, all the staff and all the board members and all the cooperators we work with, if we could unify some of our messaging, the opportunity to amplify our voice about the work we do is just huge. So we wanted to provide some tools to help us do that better as well. And so this marketing toolkit is really a collection of some of the resources and tools and tips that this group has created in order to help us do that. And I do want to say, so we've got the definition of plagiarism up here, practice of taking and using someone else's work or ideas, and we are plagiarism friendly. I would say most of the resources in this toolkit are either not Washington specific, or if they are, very easily adaptable to other states, to other communities. And for the ones that are Washington specific, we're more than happy to at least talk you through how we created them, or if it's a good model for you, encourage you to make it your own and turn it into something that works for your area. So I'm going to go through, there's 5 tabs of resources in our toolkit. I'm going to talk through them and just give you, I'm not going to go through every resource in there because we actually do have quite a bit, but at least some examples, and then have that link up the whole time so you can feel free to explore it on your own after today's session as well. The first tab, and this is one I'm not going to get too deep into because it is the most Washington specific, is our branding. We did as a state and as a network of conservation districts, we wanted to be able to, and when we were talking to legislators or the governor's office especially, or presenting conservation district work at a state level, a lot of our districts have community level branding and ways of presenting themselves that works really well for their local communities, but we wanted some way to present ourselves so that folks started to recognize conservation districts as a network of quality service providers across the state, not just one local conservation district, but a whole network of them across the state. So we came up with some branding, color palette, and a logo to help us present conservation districts that way at a state level. So you're welcome to look through that if that's something that you are interested in doing in your own state or with your associations. I'm going to move on to the next tab, which is the media and events tab. A lot of things in here are going to be templates and checklists to help you with your events and media relations. A couple examples I have on the screen right now. The first is a CD event planning checklist. So just some general guidelines starting around 6 to 8 weeks out from an event, things that you might want to think about doing and steps to take. A checklist of steps to take leading up to 4 weeks and 2 weeks out from your event. Again, a couple of things in here. There may be links to a couple of Washington specific outlets to consider, but in general, broadly applicable, doesn't have to, it's not at all specific to Washington State. This could be helpful for any conservation district, we hope. The other thing we have is a couple media release templates. One for more of a story format, if there's a story that you're wanting to feature as a media release, and a second one that's for an event media release. I think we also in there have some templates for tour packets that you can modify, but several different media and event related templates in that tab. The third is around messaging and testimonials. And this, I think especially lately, has been one of our more helpful sets of resources in this toolkit. We, because again, as I mentioned before, we really wanted to be better about using some unified messaging and language as we talked about our work to amplify our voice about conservation districts and voluntary conservation. So we spent some time developing resources in this area, and more recently, and some of you may have seen at the NACD annual meeting this year, we had a session where we talked about our elevator pitch. And again, while our elevator pitch about conservation districts in Washington State is Washington State specific, one thing we did, because we wanted conservation districts to be able to use this resource and tailor it for their local community or for different audiences within their community, we set it up kind of like a Mad Lib where we have at the top an elevator pitch with different key elements of the elevator pitch underlined. So they're the who, what, why, and how of what you do. And underneath the elevator pitch, we have a word bank. So these were other words that we had considered, thought about, were strong, but ultimately didn't choose for our final kind of statewide elevator pitch about conservation districts. But you could swap out some of the words in the word bank beneath, or come up with your own, whatever works best. Again, like if you've done your outreach plan and you've learned through research a lot more about your audience, what they care about, you could swap out some of the words in here to fit the specific audience you're going to be speaking to about your conservation district. For ours, our general elevator pitch is that conservation districts of Washington State partner with private landowners who own over 50% of the land in our state to voluntarily take action to keep our air, water, and soil healthy. They're community-based hubs of natural resource expertise and funding, led and staffed by locals who understand the needs of landscapes and fellow community members that they serve. So you can see that word community used a couple times in there, and we really liked, as far as like who we are, we ended up really liking this idea of community-based hubs for conservation districts. It really felt unique, like a unique niche that districts serve, at least here in Washington State. But if some of that language doesn't resonate for you or wouldn't work, there's again that word bank below that you could refer to or come up with your own language that works. And we, just as a note, I really want to thank, there was a supervisor here in Washington State, Marshall Stowe, who's he's I think a retired or starting to be retired marketing consultant who's now on his conservation districts board. And I just want to say, that's a really cool thing to keep in mind when you have openings on a conservation district board, is to seek people who have skill sets that you are looking for. Because Marshall really helped facilitate this project for us, as a volunteer, and to have his expertise for that was outstanding. So another thing in the messaging and testimonials area, we have some talking points about voluntary conservation programs. I know sometimes folks either misunderstand or can have some incorrect perceptions about voluntary conservation and its efficacy. So we wanted to have some really factual, accurate, and backed up talking points about voluntary conservation and why it's important. So we have those in there. Again, some of the like the main talking point and then some data points to back it up. Some of those data points are Washington specific, but you hopefully could easily tailor them to your region as well. And then we also have this worksheet for capturing effective testimonials. And so again, if you do the outreach plan first, find out some about who people trust. Here's a worksheet that could help you capture some effective testimonials about your conservation district for that audience. And one of my favorite sections of this worksheet is we have a section on how to draw out the story. And this is where you don't want to script a testimonial for anybody at all. You want them to use their own words, but you also want, it's really helpful to have some questions to ask them that prompts a really good story from them in their own words. And so we have a list of 10 questions here that can really help you prompt a great story and great testimonial from someone. We've got a couple of questions in here that are my favorite. There's one that's, what word or phrase best describes your relationship with the district and why? We've had some like really beautiful responses to that. Things like family, neighbors, friends. It's just things that I don't think many other organizations that their cooperators say that about. So it was really effective, some of the answers we've gotten to that question. And then the other one I especially like is if someone asks you, why should I support conservation districts? What would you tell them? That has really pulled out some great testimonials for our conservation districts. So under outreach and engagement, there's several resources here, but I want to highlight a couple. The first is tips to engage elected officials and decision makers. This is one that Doug Rushton, I think some of you will know Doug Rushton, brought to my attention that he'd received some calls from a fellow supervisor or district manager who just wasn't really sure how to start beginning a relationship with an elected official or decision maker. So we worked on this piece that's the how, why, and what of engaging with elected officials, and some tips and ideas of how you might do that, and some questions once you have a meeting or an engagement scheduled with them. What are some things you could ask and talk about? Also created this piece on technical assistance, because it's just one of those phrases that's so familiar to a lot of us, but for many people outside of our world, it doesn't mean much. And we wanted to be able to really show, not just tell, but show how important that work is before they let people, it's easy to see the importance of a project once the ground is broken on it and they're building something. But like all the work that comes before that to make that possible. So we created this graphic about all the steps. It's not even all, but some of the main steps of technical assistance that occur before ground breaks on a conservation project, along with some messages about what it is. And then we also have this 10 ways conservation districts can help you. Again, we're trying to do things that are a little more visual, short, giving people a chance to really zero in on something that appeals to them at a glance. And that's a good lead in to our final tab, which is photos and graphics. Again, both for millennial generation, which is becoming the largest population in our country, along with, and then considering elected officials, and a lot of the folks we want to talk with have very short amount of time. We're trying to communicate in more visual, at a glance way as much as possible. So we've been trying to build out our photo and graphic resources. And the first resource, this is the most Washington specific thing in here because it is our photo gallery. But I'm sharing it in case anybody has any interest in giving me a call sometime to talk about how we've built it. We've done this kind of similar to NACD, has a great photo contest they run each year. We do the same thing in Washington State. We run a photo contest for our conservation districts with the opportunity to win a free scholarship to the district employee conference each year for the top 3 winners of the contest. But all those entries of our contest get added to this gallery that all conservation districts and our agency and the Association of Conservation Districts may use in their outreach materials. So right now we have, I think at the last look, we just closed out another contest. I think we're going to be around 13 or 1400 photos now in our gallery. This piece we put out in the last year is visual equivalents for conservation measures. We wanted to make sure, again, a lot of our audiences don't have that much familiarity with some of the technical terms that we use. They can't really picture what some of the measures that we are reporting mean, what that really looks like. So we wanted to come up with some equivalents that are a little more relatable. And again, this could be something that you choose based on your audience's interests and values. If they are a football fan, you compare, how much work has been done to the number of football fields, or even like their specific college football field that they went to, like how many of those football fields would it be, or how deep of that football field would it be? So it's been helping us kind of translate our work to things like, instead of just saying irrigation projects returned an estimated 14.1 cubic feet of water per second to our salmon streams, that doesn't really mean that much to a lot of people, but saying that that's enough to fill 14 Olympic-sized swimming pools a day. It's like, oh, okay. And what this graphic is, for each of these measures, we've got them broken out by liquid, mass, length and distance, area. You'll see on the right-hand side, this is the equivalent, and some of these are linked. Those are linked to graphics that any district is welcome to use. So like a graphic of that swimming pool, a graphic of a football field, a bathtub, a car, Statue of Liberty, the dump truck. And we also have a whole, down at the bottom here, there's a whole digital image and graphics library that any district is welcome to use as well. There are going to be a couple Washington specific things, because again, that's our audience. So if we were to find out that we're talking to somebody that summited Mount Rainier, well, hey, I'm going to use that as my graphic comparison. Or if somebody is from the Seattle area, I might use the height of the Space Needle. So for your area, you can think about and probably find the metrics for some local or state level iconic images or places that your audiences can relate to. So that's a sample of what's in that marketing toolkit. I really explore it. If there's anything in there that is helpful for you, I invite you to use it. If there's something that you'd like a file so that you can tailor it to your conservation district, I can try to send you the file. A lot of this is in InDesign, but I think there's a few things in there that are Word and Publisher as well, but most of it's InDesign. But you are welcome to contact me if there's anything that you want to tailor or change or modify to a file. And I think with that, we've got about 15 or 20 minutes left for questions and discussion. I'll put my contact information up there and just open it up if anybody has comments.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Laura. Laura is a huge advocate for not only conservation districts, but also our urban and community conservation work. And I neglected to mention that she sits on our resource policy group, which is the group that oversees this, the webinars as well. So thank you so much, Laura, for sharing this information. Every time I hear you present it, this was probably the third time now, I learn additional information, and it's such an honor to continue to work with you on sharing this great information out. So I encourage everybody to put any questions within the chat box, and please let us know what questions you may have for Laura. In the interim, Laura, if you don't mind, would you share sort of one of your favorite aspects of marketing conservation districts with us? What you enjoy the most about this work?
Oh gosh, That is a really good question. um, I would say the thing that I love the most about it can also sometimes be the most frustrating. And that's because I just feel like, and I know I'm biased, but I truly believe that conservation districts and the model that they have of locally based conservation, where it's really neighbors helping neighbors. I just feel like that model is the most exciting and effective model out there for our natural resource and agriculture issues. And so it's the most exciting thing for me to let folks know about that. The frustrating part is the number of people who don't know about it yet. Because I mean, districts have been doing such amazing work for over 75 years. And so, you know, I get very excited to invite people into this wonderful conservation world and see kind of light bulbs go off where they recognize, like, yeah, that is the model that we've been needing. And it's like, yeah, it's been here. So it is very exciting though to just have something to market that you believe in so much, and then see how when people get it and get what conservation districts do and the value provide, to see that light bulb go off is very rewarding.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think this relates to our first question as well. Heath has asked if you've ever developed a list of words that make non-conservation professionals, so exactly those neighbors that we were just talking about, glaze over, and a list of perhaps alternative words that are more layperson friendly.
Ooh, that is a really, really good idea. I haven't. Oh gosh, there is a cool resource out there, and I'm not sure if I'm going to remember it off the top of my head. I think it may have been from Nature Conservancy that has something kind of like that I've shared with some of our conservation districts, where it's sort of a table of, instead of saying riparian buffer, say this, instead of saying nutrient management, say this. I can see if I can track that down, but I have not done that, and it probably would be a very cool project to do more specifically for conservation district work. That's a great idea.
Thank you. And I think that relates to a couple of comments from Karen as well. So one, she had said that perhaps in their district, they prefer to use the term, we offer help and education to cost share programs from NRCS USDA, but they don't necessarily offer cost share. So it's just a good reminder that we have a lot of opportunities to share language and share the way that we perhaps do outreach in conservation districts. So definitely for those of you on the webinar, check out our archives, because we've got great examples of other programs as well. And Karen does say as well, it's a passion for conservation and community service that makes conservation districts succeed. And so kind of on that note as well, Laura, I'm wondering if you have sort of one takeaway tip for everybody on the webinar today. If they're just starting their outreach journey, where do you think would be the best place to start?
I would say, to look at, if you have any kind of annual plan or long range plan, or even sort of an informal plan of where your district is wanting to go, and identify the goals that could most benefit from outreach, partnerships, marketing, and then use either the outreach plan that I shared today, or just some way to come up with a really good strategy for how you're going to build that communications work into achieving that goal. But I think really referring to the direction and goals that your conservation district wants to take, and identifying where your communication efforts can be a most help to get you there is a great starting point. And then it'll really help you, by referring to that goal, identify the audiences and the gaps that communication could help fill in and move you along the way.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Laura. And we have a couple of questions or comments as well that if you do find that resource from the Nature Conservancy, to share it with everyone. And I'm happy after the webinar, I'll send out the recording to everybody as well as the resources that Laura sent or shared with us today. So if we find additional materials that are helpful, I can share that out with the audience as well.
And I think I just found it. So it's the language of conservation, and it's not, I feel like it's not as, it doesn't cover everything that we in the conservation district world talk about, but let me share this in the chat in case it's at least a good starting point for anybody else. I've referred to it a couple of times in my work. There you go. I just put it in the chat there.
Excellent. And then we have a question from Betty Jo from Florida. She says their district's theme is conservation is everybody's business, and we program to inner city, urban, suburban, and rural communities alike, and they secure a lot of corporate support. Does the marketing toolkit from Washington include information on seeking corporate or foundation support?
No, it doesn't. I would say that we would love to learn from other districts on how they've done that, because that's one area we have not. We have one resource that's around sort of some tips on getting support for conservation efforts, but it's not specific to foundations or corporations. That's a very cool angle.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly in the toolkit, there's a lot of opportunity to help districts develop their elevator speech and some, which you went over in this webinar today, but also some key language that districts may be able to continue to adapt and use for grant writing for not only foundations, but also potentially corporate sponsors, et cetera, as well.
Absolutely. And I would say that outreach worksheet is really helpful for grant writing and seeking funds as well. Like, use it for your funder. Really fill it out for a funder. I think that could help guide your writing and presentation of a funding request.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions. So do you have any sort of closing thoughts or anything that you would like to end with, Laura, before we wrap up the webinar?
I just want to, again, thank NACD for this opportunity, Urban and Community Group, and for all of you joining today. And, you know, the real heart of that marketing toolkit is just about being able to, for all of us to have an easier time when we're trying to tell our story, because we all know there's no shortage of good stories in the work that we do. But actually getting them out there effectively when we all have several other things on our plate can be a challenge. And I hope what I shared today was helpful, but I also hope that you know, through opportunities like this and connections like this, that we can start helping each other too. So I would love if anybody has resources that they want to pass my way that I can learn from. I'd love that. And I also look forward to hopefully meeting and talking with some of you in person at other future meetings, so we can trade notes and help all of us do a better job with our communication and marketing efforts. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura. And again, you're such a supporter of conservation districts, so I'm so pleased that we could share this presentation again. And we've seen many great comments thanking you as well in the chat box, so we really appreciate it. And I want to encourage everyone on the webinar as well to continue to use these resources especially as you start developing any potential grants for our Urban Agriculture Conservation Grant Initiative, which we will again announce this fall. The toolkit will be very helpful in developing some of your early plans for not only the grant itself in drafting that grant for NACD, but also some of the community outreach and partnership building work that you will likely do through those grants as well. So please stay tuned to NACD's weekly newsletter for information about upcoming deadlines for that grant when we announce it, as well as other opportunities to join additional webinars. So with that, thank you again so much, Laura, for the presentation, and we will see all of you next month on the next webinar. Take care.